January the 18th, 1954. Coventry. A bitterly cold Monday afternoon is settling over the Radford community.
This is a city still very much rebuilding after the Blitz. People are clinging to this new sense of routine, of respectability.
And for a 14-year-old boy, Adrian Mogano, the day ends with a very common frustration. He's locked out of his home on Holland Road.
Exactly. His mother, Penelope, a woman known for her punctuality, should have been there. She was never, ever late. But he waits. For over an hour, in the cold, knocking, calling, nothing.
Until his father gets home.
It's almost 4:30 when his father, Carlo Mogano, arrives from his shift at the Daimler factory. The moment he sees his son on the doorstep, shivering, and feels that unnerving silence from the house, he knows this isn't right.
This isn't just a simple mix-up.
No. Upon getting in, they walk into a silence that is just shattered by what's waiting for them in the family dining room.
It's a discovery that it defies all comprehension. 44-year-old Penelope Mogano, a respectable housewife, a mother, is slumped in a chair.
Her body is almost completely drained of blood. It's an explosion of pure hatred in this quiet, normal, domestic setting.
For the police, it must have been clear from the second they walked in, this was not a simple homicide.
Not at all. This was an act of profound, sustained, and very personal violence. Professor James Webster, who conducted the post-mortem, established the horrific facts that immediately marked this as one of Britain's most disturbing unsolved murders.
The pathology report documented 25 wounds.
25 separate wounds. It pointed directly to what investigators just immediately termed overkill.
Can you just walk us through the anatomy of that attack? What did Professor Webster's findings actually tell them about the brutality and, maybe more importantly, the killer's intent?
Well, the attack had two very distinct phases and two separate weapons, both of which were taken from the Mogano home.
Okay.
First, there was the blunt force trauma. Penelope sustained approximately 12 hammer blows to her head, delivered with such focused and extraordinary power that they caused a massive skull fracture. The floor of the base of her skull was laving.
Yeah.
It was completely destroyed, leading to severe brain lacerations.
That alone would have been fatal.
Immediately, due to shock and the brain damage. But as you say, the killer didn't stop there. They continued. They moved from that fatal violence to something else, something calculated.
Something that looks like it's designed to erase her identity.
Precisely. The second phase involved a knife, a 12-inch carving knife, which police determined was taken from the kitchen cutlery drawer.
And this was used for the mutilation.
Yes, for the extensive cuts across her face. Her lips were viciously severed, and in an act of violation that really haunted the detectives, her tongue was sliced completely in half.
My God.
She was left exsanguinated blood white from the totality of these injuries. And the final horrifying detail was the clear evidence of a struggle. Defensive bruising on the backs of her hands. She fought. She fought desperately against this attack.
When you look at that evidence, the sheer number of wounds, the switch from a hammer to a knife, the specific facial mutilation, it points so strongly to a motive. Not robbery, but this deep, consuming hatred, maybe even a ritualistic rage, designed specifically to silence her. So why? Why was this frenzy targeted at a woman described by everyone as a popular, respectable mother, well known in her community?
That is the central, enduring question of this case.
Yeah.
It's why this mystery has lasted 71 years. The local police, under Chief Constable Edward Pendleton, they knew the gravity of it immediately. They knew this would terrify the community.
So they called in the best.
They called in Scotland Yard, Detective Superintendent John Edmonds and Detective Sergeant Ted Williams. This signaled just how important it was to find this person and find them quickly.
And the investigation that followed was it was massive, wasn't it? Almost unprecedented for the time.
The scale was historic. By April 1954, just 3 months in, they had over 10,000 formal signed statements. They questioned more than 25,000 people. They saturated Coventry, trying to find any loose thread. And yet, despite this monumental effort, the trail just went cold.
But they had leads. We know they focused on 3 main possibilities.
They did. A bogus electrical inspector, a man seen fleeing a phone box nearby with a bloodied, bandaged hand, and the chilling speculative link to the serial killer Peter Manuel. But not one single person was ever arrested, ever charged.
So we're starting our investigation with a mother of 2, savaged in her own home, with seemingly no enemies. We have this huge police response that was completely frustrated. The core issues we have to look at are, What secrets was Penelope Mogano keeping on those mysterious afternoon trips? And who in that community knew who killed her but chose to stay silent?
Welcome to Whispers of Crime.
Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Whispers of Crime, for more content like this.
Let's begin with the woman herself, Penelope Mogano. On the surface, her life seems utterly conventional for 1954 England. She was born on the Isle of Wight, came from a respectable middle-class background. By 1954, she settled in Coventry. Her husband, Carlo, was of Italian parentage, but they were a completely integrated, respected family in Radford, raising their 2 teenage sons.
But there was a side to their life that was anything but conventional, wasn't there? Their passion. They weren't just quiet homebodies.
No, not at all. And this is absolutely key to understanding the context of the murder. Their social lives revolved, almost entirely, around old-time ballroom dancing.
Which was a huge deal back then.
It was a massive social pursuit. Competitive, high stakes. The Moganos went to the Savoy Cinema Ballroom 5 times a week. They were in competitive exhibitions. They were prominent, successful, and very, very visible within that specific world.
5 nights a week, that's more than just a hobby. That's a deep social immersion. And with that comes, intense relationships, rivalries, all of the things that can form in a competitive environment.
And the police certainly believe the answer lay somewhere in that dancing circle. But first, let's just nail down the timeline of her final afternoon, because it's startlingly precise.
Okay.
We know for a fact Penelope was alive at 1:45 in the afternoon. That's when Carlo left for work and Adrian went off to school.
And she had an appointment later that she never made it to.
That's right. She was due to meet friends, Mr. and Mrs. Sidney Worrell, at their home on Bassett Road at 3 o'clock. Based on forensics, the time of death was placed between 3 and 4 p.m., with police really focusing in on a narrow window around 3:30.
So a 60-minute window maximum for a killer to get in, commit a crime with 2 weapons and 25 wounds, get rid of one of those weapons, and then leave without being seen.
It suggests either incredible luck or a calculated familiarity with her routine.
And the evidence of her clothes supports that, doesn't it?
It does. When she was found, she was wearing house clothes and an apron. But on her bed, a clean, freshly laundered dress was laid out.
She was getting ready to go out.
She was killed in the middle of preparing for her 3 o'clock visit. The attack struck at the exact moment she was transitioning from her domestic routine to her social one. It suggests the killer either knew her schedule or was someone she was, prepared to let in for a moment.
Which brings us to the biggest mystery. The one that still baffles everyone who looks at this case. The unexplained afternoon trips.
This is the shadow that hangs over her final 4 months. Starting in December 1953, she began taking these regular secret afternoon trips.
And the timing is crucial because she had just publicly resigned from something else, citing a need for rest.
Exactly. She had recently left her commitments with the Radford Towns Women's Guild, telling people she needed the afternoons to rest.
So she tells everyone she needs to stay home, then immediately starts these secret outings. That is a clear sign she was hiding something. What was the critical detail about these trips?
The dancing shoes. Family members noticed that on these trips she would take her dancing shoes with her, often wrapped discreetly in brown paper.
So the trips were connected to her passion, but they were secret. She was lying to her social circle, maybe even her family.
It's the big question. Why resign from the guild just to go somewhere else? Was it a medical issue she was hiding? A secret business? Or was it, as police suspected, a clandestine attempt to find a new dance partner or get private lessons?
But the investigation, as huge as it was, never found out where she was going.
Completely failed to account for her destination. They spoke to everyone, every member of the Savoy Club, every instructor, every friend, and nothing. It's as if the person or people who knew where she was going were terrified to come forward.
Which suggests the purpose of those trips, whatever it was dangerous and probably linked directly to her murder.
The complete silence around her activities is in itself a deafening clue. It implies either her own extreme discretion or, far more likely, extraordinary fear or active concealment by the person she was meeting. That silence has protected her killer for over 70 years.
Now let's turn to the police response. By the standards of the 1950s, it was staggering, and the sheer volume of that effort contrasts so dramatically with the complete lack of a result.
You have to remember the context of 1954 Britain. The resources mobilized for this were monumental. Bringing in Scotland Yard, sending Detective Superintendent Edmonds, that signaled this was a national priority.
Let's just try to quantify that effort. What does unprecedented scale actually look like on the ground?
The numbers tell the story. Over 25,000 residents were questioned. A huge house-to-house canvassing operation that went on for months.
And the statements.
More than 10,000 formal, legally signed statements were collected, all processed by hand. This was an entirely paper-driven investigation relying on memory and honesty.
And they weren't just relying on interviews, were they? They set up a kind of systemic dragnet.
They did. Detectives distributed 1,500 specific questionnaires in the Radford area. They had 12 targeted questions about movements, strange visitors, anything people saw that Monday afternoon.
They even checked all the local service workers.
Every single one. Bakers, milkmen, insurance agents, postmen, all interviewed and systematically cleared. They even, and this tells you something about their thinking, they even checked mental institutions across the county.
Because they thought only a maniac could do this.
That was an early and widely held theory, that this was a calculated act of pure frenzy.
But when you look at that level of effort, the thousands of hours, the Scotland Yard expertise, how did it fail so completely? Was the killer just that meticulous? Or did the technology of the era just fail them?
It was a combination of both, really. But the forensic limitations of the 1950s proved to be the Achilles heel of the whole investigation.
Okay, let's break that down. The killer was clearly meticulous. There was no forced entry, which suggests Penelope either knew him or let him in willingly.
Right, so that investigative pathway is immediately gone. But the physical evidence they did find, they just couldn't leverage it properly.
Let's start with the most obvious piece of missing evidence, the hammer.
The primary weapon. Yeah. The one used for the 12 skull fractures. It was never recovered. The killer took it from the scene and disposed of it.
And the police looked everywhere for it.
Everywhere. They conducted exhaustive searches of every drain, ditch, and pond in the Radford common area. Nothing. Disposing of that weapon eliminated a huge potential source of evidence.
Then there are the fingerprints. This is maybe the most tantalizing and frustrating clue of all.
Absolutely crucial. They found partial fingerprints in two key places. At the crime scene itself, and more importantly, on the handle of that 12-inch carving knife.
And the police were very excited about this.
They were. They described the prints as important. But here's the reality of 1954 forensics. There was no automated database, no national system. The partials had to be manually compared, one by one, against existing criminal records.
Which means if the killer had no criminal record.
The identifier was useless. The prints didn't match anyone in the system, which strongly suggests the killer was a first-time offender or just someone who lived completely outside of criminal scrutiny. The technology failed them.
If they had those prints today,
it would likely be solved within days, using modern databases, genealogical techniques. It's heartbreaking, really.
And what about blood evidence? There were bloodstains found nearby, weren't there?
Yes, in a telephone kiosk about 300 yards from the house. They were sent for analysis. But blood typing in the 50s was just so rudimentary. It was inconclusive. They couldn't link it back to Penelope, and they couldn't identify who left it.
So every piece of physical evidence they had led to a dead end.
It was an institutional failure, in a way. Yet, despite that, they had this strong conviction that the answer was right there, in the community.
They were so convinced they used some unusual methods.
They did. Scotland Yard detectives actually mingled with the mourners at Penelope's cremation on January 25th. They were watching for suspicious reactions, guilt, any unusual behavior. It was a tactic born of pure desperation.
Don't forget to follow Whispers of Crime on all platforms. Like, share, and comment. Your engagement really helps us bring attention to these important historical cases.
That desperation culminated a year later in the chief constable's powerful public statement.
Right. What did he say?
In 1955, he stated that police believed someone was deliberately withholding information that would disclose the identity of Penelope Mogano's murderer.
So this wasn't just a hopeful appeal. It was a deeply held suspicion that the killer was being protected.
Yes. Protected by, and this is a quote, misguided loyalty or affection out of fear or perhaps out of guilt. It's a devastating conclusion. That the solution was there, but it was concealed by human silence.
And that silence allowed a killer to live free. They believed he was local, known, and just living undetected among the very people they'd interviewed.
It's what defined the cold case status of the investigation from then on.
Despite all those roadblocks, the police did generate 3 incredibly compelling, very specific leads, any one of which could have solved it.
That's the real tragedy of it. They were chasing the right kinds of suspects, but they just couldn't get that definitive proof.
Let's start with the first one, the bogus electrical inspector. His proximity to the Mogano home on that afternoon is just terrifying.
His whole modus operandi was predatory. He'd pose as an inspector claiming he needed to check switches for television interference.
Which was a believable problem in the early 1950s.
A very common and believable problem. And he targeted homes where he knew housewives would be alone and likely to let him in.
And his goal wasn't theft, it was sexual intrusion.
Correct. Police confirmed he'd visited over 20 houses in the weeks before the murder. In at least 5 to 7 of those cases, he got inside and made improper sexual advances before he was chased off. It establishes this pattern of invasive behavior targeting women exactly like Penelope.
And what connects him directly to her street, to Holland Road?
Timing and location. He was reported calling at a house just 150 yards away, a few minutes walk, at around 1:30 in the afternoon on the day of the murder.
Just before Carlo and Adrian left the house.
Exactly. Placing him right there in the immediate neighborhood, casing potential victims. He was also seen lurking near some bushes by the Savoy Cinema Ballroom, the hub of the Mogano social world.
So he was either scoping the area or waiting for a specific target. Did witnesses give a good description?
A very detailed one. Aged 25 to 30, relatively short, maybe 5'2" to 5'6", thick, wavy black hair, a rosy or sometimes sallow complexion. He had a distinctive London or Southern accent which stood out in Coventry.
And there was something about his laugh, wasn't there?
One witness noted his nice musical laugh. Crucially, he was also linked to a green lorry with the name Cooper on the side.
So with all that detail, the accent, the laugh, the lorry, the MO, why did this lead just evaporate?
They questioned dozens of men who fit the description across the Midlands, but they were all eliminated. The most likely theory is that he was an itinerant predator moving from town to town, and he simply vanished from Coventry once the massive murder investigation began.
So he remains a viable profile, but was never identified.
Never.
Okay, let's move to the second lead. And this one is maybe the most specific piece of witness testimony there is. The man with the bloodied hand.
This sighting is critically important. It's all about the timing. At 4:25 p.m., just minutes after Carlo Mogano found his wife, a housewife was sitting in her car near a newsagent shop on Heathcote Street, about 300 yards from the murder scene.
And what did she see?
She saw a young man hurriedly leaving a nearby telephone kiosk. His behavior was immediately suspicious. He was nervously holding his right hand to his left cheek, looking around furtively, and then he just ran off across a piece of waste ground, heading towards Kearsley.
And the defining detail was the injury, the hand.
Yes, his right hand was heavily, almost clumsily bandaged. The witness described it as a makeshift dressing, maybe a tea towel, wrapped in a bulky fashion as if done in haste.
Which implies he just sustained a significant injury.
A defensive injury. Given Penelope's own defensive wounds, it's highly plausible the killer was cut when she grabbed for the carving knife before it was used against her.
And this suspect's description fits. Mid-20s, 5'6", dark hair, black overcoat. He's fleeing the area with a fresh, serious wound that's consistent with the struggle. Why couldn't they find him?
Again, the limitations of 1954. The witness was confident she could identify him. Police spent weeks showing her hundreds of photos from criminal albums. Nothing.
And the blood in the phone box.
It was inconclusive. It was circumstantial, but they couldn't prove it was his or that it connected to the crime scene. The strongest potential suspect they had just became a phantom.
Which brings us to the third lead. This adds a whole new layer of calculated vendetta connecting Penelope's murder back to the ballroom dancing community through a series of arsons.
The pattern of violence targeting the Moganos and their friends before the murder is deeply unsettling. This wasn't random.
No.
3 months before the murder, in November '53, petrol-soaked rags were placed under the bonnet of the Mogano family car and set on fire. It was a clear attempt to damage or intimidate.
And then, just days before she was killed, the violence escalated and moved into her social circle.
That's exactly. On January 15th, just 72 hours before the murder, petrol was used again, this time to start a fire in the pantry of the Worrells home.
The very friends she was due to visit that afternoon.
The very same friends.
Yeah.
And the Worrells were also highly prominent figures in the competitive old-time dancing scene.
So the police initially latched onto this idea of a dance hater, someone with a malicious vendetta against that whole community.
They did. But they struggled to bridge the psychological gap between a relatively cowardly arsonist and the kind of person capable of that calculated, ritualistic, and incredibly violent murder.
But the coincidence is just too great to ignore.
It really is. 2 petrol attacks, targeting the victim and her close friends, all connected by the dance hall, all happening within weeks of the murder. It strongly suggests a single calculated individual was stalking that specific social circle.
So with these three strong leads are going nowhere, the police had to methodically eliminate the most obvious suspect in any case like
The
this.
husband, Carlo Mogano. He was, of course, the first person they interviewed in depth. He was taken to Coventry Police Headquarters for an intensive interrogation that lasted about 10 hours.
They had to explore whether the rivalries from the dance scene had maybe spilled over into the marriage itself.
Exactly. But they ultimately cleared him completely.
What was the definitive proof of his innocence?
A few key things. First, his alibi. His work schedule at the Daimler factory was documented and fully corroborated by supervisors and coworkers. He was accounted for during that crucial 3 to 4 p.m. window.
Okay.
Second, he cooperated fully, gave them access to everything they needed. And finally, the experienced Scotland Yard detectives, after hours of questioning, found his demeanor to be that of a genuinely grieving and mystified husband, not a murderer. He was fully exonerated.
So once Carlo was cleared, the other conventional motives, robbery, sexual assault, they also quickly dissolved.
Robbery was impossible. Nothing was taken. Sexual assault, in the traditional sense, was definitively ruled out by the pathology report. Professor Webster was clear that the killer's gratification was from the violence itself, not from contact.
Which pushed the police back to the only motive left, as personal and as strange as it seemed, the dancing jealousy theory.
Yes. This theory requires us to believe that some kind of slight or rivalry in that competitive dancing world could trigger this pathological homicidal rage.
It seems like a stretch.
It does. But they had to pursue it. They focused on conflicts within the Savoy Old-Time Dancing Club. They even uncovered a specific incident from August 1953, 5 months before the murder.
What happened?
Penelope was forced to change dancing partners. And this event profoundly distressed her. Friends told police she found it impossible to talk about afterwards. It suggests some intense emotional distress, maybe even fear, linked to that social rupture.
But still a partner change. It just feels too small to motivate this level of ritualistic violence.
It does. It requires a perpetrator with an extremely fragile ego and a pathological level of obsession. It implies the attack, the frenzied overkill, the mutilation of the lips and tongue, was specific revenge for something Penelope said or refused to say to someone in that dancing community.
That deep mismatch between motive and methodology, it naturally leads you to consider an outside possibility, a purely sadistic killer.
And given the extreme nature of the violence, investigators had to seriously consider they were dealing with a dangerous transient predator, someone capable of that fanatical frenzy who struck without any local motive.
And this is where the name of the Scottish serial killer, Peter Manuel, enters the conversation.
Peter Manuel was a notorious killer, hanged in 1958 for 7 murders, though he was suspected of many more. And he aligns, chillingly well, with the specific psychological and operational profile of the Mogano killer.
What are the specific characteristics that make him such a compelling, even if it's unproven, suspect?
There are 3 critical overlaps. First, his methodology. Manuel was known for using dual weaponry knives and blunt instruments, just like the hammer and carving knife at Holland Road.
Okay.
Second, his psychological profile. He was a violent sexual deviant who got gratification from inflicting extreme pain, which aligns perfectly with the mutilation and overkill inflicted on Penelope.
Yeah.
And third, his entry technique. He was known for getting into homes without signs of forced entry, which fits the controlled nature of the Mogano scene.
So if the profile fits the crime so perfectly, why is the Peter Manuel theory still just speculation?
Because it's so difficult to place him definitively in Coventry in January 1954. While his activities were wide-ranging, police have never found any direct corroborating evidence, no solid witness sightings, no travel documents that puts him in the Midlands at the time. It remains this terrifying case of a perfect psychological fit that just lacks that final piece of physical proof.
As we reflect on this case, 71 years on, we have to confront the biggest failure of the investigation. Not just the missing hammer, but the enduring mystery of Penelope's secret movements.
Those afternoon trips. They remain the most critical, unresolved piece of this entire puzzle. The fact that this woman, who led a very public life in the dance scene, could maintain such profound secrecy for 4 months it's profoundly meaningful.
What were the final conclusions from investigators about those trips?
The speculation never really moved beyond the 3 original theories. Secret dancing lessons, maybe with a married partner, a clandestine romantic relationship, or a highly private medical issue. But every single one of those paths leads back to the same conclusion.
That the person who knew her destination chose not to come forward.
Exactly. The person she was meeting was either the killer or someone directly protecting the killer. Their silence was the wall that has protected the perpetrator all these years.
We've talked about how the limitations of 1950s forensics were the critical barrier. The manual fingerprint checking, the rudimentary blood typing.
They were the major impediment. The police had what they called important partial prints on the knife. But because the killer wasn't a known criminal, they hit a wall. The technology depended entirely on the killer having made a mistake before.
If that physical evidence was recoverable today, how might modern science change the outcome?
Well, if the partial prints or the trace blood from the phone kiosk were properly preserved, and that is a major if after all this time, the chances of a breakthrough would be extremely high.
DNA and genealogical databases.
Precisely. They've solved cases far older than this. Finding even microscopic trace DNA on the handle of that knife could potentially lead directly to the killer, or at least to their immediate family members.
The case was never officially closed, was it? Just classified as unsolved.
Correct. The chief constable's vow in 1955 that there would be no sparing of energy, that ensured the case file remained active even if it was dormant. It's really a testament to the investigative exhaustion they faced.
And the public fascination with the case continues. We've seen a real resurgence in true crime media coverage just this year, in 2024.
The case's profile is rising dramatically again. It's driven by the true crime community, online forums that obsess over historical cold cases. Major UK podcasts like They Walk Among Us and others have dedicated full episodes to reviewing the evidence.
It ensures the legacy of this terrible crime isn't forgotten.
And it maintains a little bit of pressure, hoping that someone, somewhere, will finally break that 7-decade silence.
The murder of Penelope Mogano is such a profound tragedy, and it's defined by its contradictions. A killer who showed meticulous control getting in, choosing the moment to strike, but then unleashed this calculated, frenzied, ritualistic violence.
It's the ultimate reflection of a community failure. The lack of a clear motive, no robbery, no typical sexual assault. It suggests a deeply personal vendetta. Yet it was against a woman with no public enemies. The investigative team was just exhausted, concluding that the solution wasn't missing. It was being actively withheld by someone in Coventry.
And that person, whether it was a jealous rival, a stalker from the dancing scene, or the person she met on those secret trips, they allowed the perpetrator to escape justice. Carlo Mogano lived until 1986, 32 years without ever knowing why his wife was taken so brutally.
The dependence of 1950s police work on subjective human identification and limited forensic databases. It meant the partial prints, the inconclusive blood, it was all wasted. The killer's secret was allowed to survive, protected by technology's limitations and, crucially, by human silence.
Which brings us back to those crucial minutes right after the murder, the flight of the killer between 4 and 4:30 p.m. We have two key pieces of evidence, one present, one absent, that define the tragedy.
We have this sighting of the man with a heavily blood-stained, bulky bandage on his right hand, fleeing a phone kiosk just 300 yards away at 4:25. It suggests a serious, fresh injury from the struggle.
But the hammer, the primary blunt force weapon, it was never recovered despite all those searches.
It vanished completely.
So here's the final haunting thought for you to consider. If the killer's right hand was so severely injured that it needed a bulky, makeshift dressing just minutes after the murder, suggesting an immediate flight from the scene, why was the heavy primary murder weapon, the hammer, never found discarded along that same escape route?
Did he drop it and someone else found it, protecting him through concealment? Did he actually carry the hammer with him as some kind of trophy, despite his injury as he fled? Or was the bloodied hand a complete coincidence, and the man seen fleeing had nothing to do with it?
The answer to that contradiction, the missing hammer and the bloodied hand, may finally be the key to the identity of Penelope Mogano's killer. Don't forget to follow Whispers of Crime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and other podcast platforms for daily updates on every crime, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Whispers of Crime. Like, share this episode with others who might have information about this case and help. Also comment your suggestions below. Drop your positive review and rating. Remember to check out our recent released UK historical cold case like this.